Hi, welcome to Back to the Box Office. This is Marcus, and today I'm joined by a special guest. This is Dustin.
Hi.
So, we'll be back with Danny in the near future, but just schedules precluded him from being here this week. But anyways, so today's episode, we are going to be talking about the Godzilla film that came out this past weekend, and we're going to compare it to a movie that came out in 1997 called Jurassic Park 2, which I'm sure most of you guys have probably heard of. So the reason why we're comparing these two is because exactly 20 years ago, the number one movie in the box office was Star Wars Episode 1 still. So, it was number one for a while, so we didn't want to necessarily compare that to Star Wars and every episode be that. So we're thinking, we'll compare, a couple monster, basically a couple monster movies. So today we're going to be going with Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World. So I'll just run through the numbers, then we'll kind of dig into it a little bit. So, Godzilla, the King of the Monsters movie that came out this past weekend, it opened at $47 million. It had a budget of $170 million. It opened in 4,100 theaters, and it made an average of $11,630 per theater. Jurassic Park 2 came out May 23rd, 1997. It opened at $72 million. It opened in 3,200 theaters. It had a budget of $73 million. Its worldwide gross at the end of its run was $618 million, which is also good for the second highest grossing film of 1997. And it made an average of $21,000 per theater. Really closer to $22,000 per theater. So now that we got those numbers a little bit out of the way, we can actually start to dive into the movie a little bit. So, I guess we'll probably dive first into to Godzilla, King of the Monsters. So, Dustin, I'll ask you real quick. What was your opinion, or what is your opinion of this whole MonsterVerse thing that they're trying to do? So, the MonsterVerse being the first Godzilla came out in 2014 with Ken Watanabe and Bryan Cranston. The Kong Skull Island one that came out 2017, right?
Mm-hmm.
That had Tom Hiddleston and John Goodman, Samuel Jackson. And now this third one. What's your overall opinion of the MonsterVerse?
I don't know. It's tough because I grew up liking a lot of the Godzilla movies. I watched a lot of the old ones. We had the VHS tapes. So I enjoy seeing the updated versions, but it just doesn't interest me the same way. So I was really excited for that first Godzilla movie. And I enjoyed it a lot. I thought, there were things that I disagreed with. But for the most part, I thought it was a really good adaptation and an overall good movie. Kong Skull Island, I wasn't too crazy about. I wasn't rushing out to see it the day it came out or anything like that. And then now with King of the Monsters, I like what they're building. But it's weird because I really only have that type of connection and memory to half of it. I really only fondly remember Godzilla.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion of the MonsterVerse of those three films, I feel I watched Godzilla last night, and after watching all three of those films in theaters, I think that the first half of the first Godzilla, maybe to the point that Bryan Cranston died in the first one, I really liked that a lot. Mm-hmm. The rest of the film after that, I really hated. Kong Skull Island I thought was okay, and this newest Godzilla was just, in my opinion, just absolute trash. I honestly, I would have left the theater. Had I gone there just to watch it for fun, and I wasn't going to record this today, I would have actually just left. I wanted to leave. I just thought it was just so boring. It was just, if you've seen the movie, you probably noticed this fact that, there's a lot of elements, or the people listening who've seen it, there's a lot of elements to this King of the Monsters film where, you think that these characters go back this long past, Coach K and Ken Watanabe's character, for example, the way that they exchange conversation, the way that they talk to each other, you almost think to yourself oh wow, I must have not seen the Godzilla film where the two of these guys are super close friends and they're talking, and they're Ken Watanabe in the film, he makes an allusion to kind of being Coach K's dead son's friend and mentor. And then I was thinking to myself, I'm wait a minute, that's never happened. These characters aren't in the first one.
Right.
What, I mean, I know Ken Watanabe's character is, and he's playing the same role, but yeah, I was just like, what movie do these people build up these connections with? And um, yeah, I don't know. Like it was just, I really thought with Godzilla, the King of Monsters, yeah, it was so like the CG. I guess the CG was okay, I suppose, but I mean, a lot of it happens in the dark, so it's kind of hard to see what's kind of happening. I also feel like they just like absolutely like overstuffed the turkey so much that it just exploded in this film. Like there's all these monsters that we have no connection to, most of them. Like Mothra, for example. Like I know who Mothra is because of like the name. I just know who that is because that's just a Godzilla foe. Like I'm not necessarily like the biggest Godzilla fan or enthusiast in the world, but I have heard of Mothra. I've heard of, you know, Mecha Godzilla, and I've heard of some of these names. But in this film, you know, they're just there. It's like, oh, okay, like that's Mothra, and that, you know, this one is oh gosh, I can't remember the main antagonist monster's name. I think it's like Ghidorah or something like that.
Oh, Ghidorah, yeah, King Ghidorah.
Yeah, and it's just like, okay, I mean, this kind of looks a little bit like a Hydra, I guess, a little bit three-headed dragon that can regenerate its heads. Like there's just no connection to them. And I honestly, the reason why I phrased the question to you like that, like this whole idea of the MonsterVerse specifically, is that I feel like this Godzilla film, in my opinion, I mean, I don't know if they're still going to come out with Kong versus Godzilla. I mean, it's slated to come out next year.
I think it's already made.
So they might be kind of forced to do it. But I feel like, in my opinion, this Godzilla film, because as I was reading off the numbers, I mean, as you could tell, this film came out in 2019 with a $170 million budget and only opened in America with $47 million. That's a very bad showing domestically. And
yeah, that's not a good...
So, I mean, I'll pull up the numbers real quick for its entire gross. And then, I mean, we can probably kind of extrapolate how much it'll probably make worldwide. So, this Godzilla film, so it's made $187 million so far worldwide. That's as of Wednesday. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily sure of every single market that it's been released in, but as of right now, the foreign market for Godzilla makes up almost 70%, 69.5% of its total gross. So, if I had to take a guess, with X-Men coming out this weekend, and with The Secret Life of Pets 2 coming out this weekend, you know, future things that will be coming out in June, I would be really surprised if this new Godzilla makes even, I don't know, I think realistically it'll probably make like less than $400 million worldwide. Which, I mean, it's not terrible. I mean, for a film that has a $170 million budget, probably marketing pushes it over $300 million. So, I mean, will it be in the black? I mean, yeah, I suppose it will make some money, but that's a really far cry from being considered anything of a success. So, what I was going to say for the MonsterVerse is I really feel like this is the culmination of, you know, once Marvel tried to do their MCU, once they tried to have the cinematic universe, you know, there was this big push to copy them. You know, you had the failed Dark Universe, which is the Universal Monster universe, right? I know Star Wars, they're trying to create a cinematic universe, or tried, and it really didn't work.
Kind of, yeah.
I know that there's other examples too. The DCU is kind of a weird mishmash where it's kind of working, kind of failing. They're kind of moving away from it.
They're better on track now.
Yeah,
they're
so
a little more...
Yeah, it's kind of like they're all over the place with it, right? I just feel like the MonsterVerse is really the final nail in the coffin that cinematic universes overall don't typically work. Like, I think the MCU, what made that successful... I mean, obviously, probably a lot of people have talked about this, so I'm not going to say anything that's necessarily original or something that somebody else hasn't already said. But I think the reason why a film like, or the film franchise like the MCU worked and something like the MonsterVerse has totally failed is that, you know, there's just more time put into it. There's more time put into the character ideas. And this Godzilla, yeah, I mean, they want you to act like when you're watching it, that you've been along with them for this journey for 5 years, and it's like, oh my gosh, we've seen these characters for 5 years. It's like, no, you haven't. Like,
right.
I mean, like, there's a scene, and you know, this is a spoiler, but like, Ken Watanabe's character, he has to sacrifice himself, basically to help revive Godzilla. And like when he's doing it, you know, they want to play all the sad music, and these people looking at him. It's like, oh my gosh, you know, he's gonna do it. And you know, the dad from Get Out is there, and he was in West Wing. I can't remember his actual real name, but you know, he's looking at him like, you know, our good friend, and all this. I'm thinking to myself, like, well, we haven't really established these characters,
right?
Like, we haven't established the dad from Get Out, the dad of the evil girl, yeah,
of the bad,
yeah. And the guy's also in West Wing. He's also the bad guy in Billy Madison. We haven't really established his character. We haven't really established Coach K's character. We haven't really established, you know, Ken Watanabe was in the first one, but like, we haven't really established any of these people, so it doesn't really feel that high stake when he sacrifices himself. Like, to me, I mean, yeah, this isn't. I mean, we had this other movie review thing called The Unwatchable, so this isn't necessarily. I mean, we could go into why this movie sucks a lot, but just to kind of say to the main points, yeah, it wasn't very good. And one more little bit of a side note before we jump into Jurassic Park 2: The Lost World is, you know, for the people out there that are really into, you know, the whole like Illuminati type stuff and, you know, kind of weird things that happen in the film and music industry, there are definitely some things in this Godzilla movie that really kind of might set your spidey senses off if you're into that stuff. And again, I mean, I'm not a person that kind of has made those type of videos in the past, but if you watch Godzilla, there is a lot of weird things. Like, for example, you know, the organization that's basically basically the good organization in this film, the thing that's the closest to, I mean, you could say it's very akin to SHIELD, the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
It's an organization called Monarch, right?
Right.
And, you know, for the people out there that really study this stuff, I mean, you know, like Monarch, I mean, some people, you know, attached it to this whole like mind control thing, and lo and behold, in the film, the Monarch organization, they create a machine that has mind control, semi-mind control over the monsters. So you're like, okay, that's a little weird. And then, you know, there's another thing in the film where basically a main theory, this is going to sound ridiculous, but a main theory thrown out in the film, or not a main theory, but a thing that does play a part of the plot, is the whole idea of the Earth being flat. They go to the center of the flat Earth, and they, like, there's tunnels that lead you to go from one spot of the Earth to the other. It's very kind of weird, but like they kind of promote that, and I'm like, huh, that's weird that this film is basically promoting like flat earthism. And
right, is this?
And then another thing too is that like basically like there's this secret like base where that, what did you say his name was? Or Ghidorah. He is trapped in, or not trapped, but whatever. He's resting in this whole big ice block in Antarctica, and they kind of go there. There's a big fight. I just thought there was, I mean, there's probably other things too that if you're really into that stuff, if you watch Godzilla, this one, you'd probably see a lot of that stuff and you're like, wow, that's really weird. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there for the people that are into that. That for myself, I kind of caught some of those things. I was like, wow, that's really bizarre. But yeah, so now that we kind of gave a little bit of our thoughts about the Godzilla, let's jump into Jurassic Park 2 and kind of a little bit of the reason why we wanted to do that. So not only did Jurassic Park 2 come out, it came out only 1 week difference than Godzilla 2.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously 22 years apart, but only 1 week difference. And they're both sequels in a sense. You know, there's Jurassic Park. Yeah, this is Jurassic Park 2. This is, I know this is really like Godzilla number like 35.
You're right.
But this franchise, it's really Godzilla number 2. So those are another couple similarities. But another similarity that I feel like between the two is that I personally very much dislike Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World. I've seen Jurassic Park 2, The Lost World recently. Like, I've seen it probably twice over the last year, just at various different things. And I absolutely disliked it. I very much dislike both of these monster movies. Like, I mean, with Jurassic Park 2, I mean, if you're a person, if you haven't seen it in a long time, or, you know, you're 20 or you're 30 years old right now, so, you know, you were like 8 when Jurassic Park 2 came out. Like, if you haven't seen it since you were a kid, you might remember you might look back and say, like, oh, this guy's like so full of crap. Like, I love Jurassic Park 2. Well, I personally don't really have those rose tinted glasses for this film because I only watched it the one time when I was like 8 years old or whatever when it came out. and then I hadn't seen it again since then, so I don't really have this nostalgia factor.
Mm-hmm.
So when I saw it as an adult, I just straight up thought it was terrible. But Dustin, what are your opinions about Jurassic Park 2: The Lost World?
Well, I do have rose-colored glasses for it. I remember I had the VHS tape, and it had a little, like when they used to do the 3D inserts into the VHS tape. So the image on the front was like the Jurassic Park logo, and then if you moved it and tilted it, it would give you the dinosaur, and it would pop in and out. And I watched it all the time. Watching it now, like, I can obviously admit without any hesitation that it's not as good as the first one, but I don't think it's straight garbage or unwatchable. I think there's some interesting things to it. It has a lot of famous people in it. Like it really has, like, it has Jeff Goldblum coming back. It has Julianne Moore. It has Vince Vaughn. I believe it has Peter Stormare, who is the dude who pops up in everything. He's in John Wick as the Russian. He's in Armageddon as the Russian. He's he's kind of the go-to Russian.
He's a bad guy Russian.
I
think he was Satan in Constantine. Right?
I believe he was
Lucifer.
And it has a really, like, the cast hadn't broke out, hadn't done anything really yet. And it's kind of cool to go back and watch that and see, like, oh, look at young Vince Vaughn still doing the same Vince Vaughn thing, but I don't have 20 plus years of watching him do this, so it's kind of interesting and entertaining to see it when he's still so young before it's kind of just become played out or played as exactly.
Right? I mean, no, I could totally. I mean, I can understand definitely where you're coming from. I mean, I feel like to me that something that's so interesting in comparing these two films is, so like I said, I mean, so the original, or Jurassic Park 2 had a $73 million budget and ended up making $618 million worldwide. And something that I'm sure studio execs would love to hear today is that only 37% of its entire gross was domestic. So this film made most of its money internationally. It basically made its budget back its opening weekend, because it opened at $72 million, it had a budget of $73 million. Now, granted, again, there was marketing back then, so it still hadn't necessarily broken even first weekend. But it did well for itself. And Jurassic Park 2, in 1997, I mean, it was the second highest grossing film of that year. I'm sure, probably some people, if you were to dig a little deeper into what was number one, well, that year, number one was Titanic. So, I mean, the reason why, if you look at it, you're like, oh my gosh, like Titanic made $1.8 billion in 1997, and Jurassic World, or I don't want to keep calling it Jurassic World, it's called Jurassic Park Lost World.
The Lost World, Jurassic Park 2,
yeah. And then there's Jurassic Worlds as well, but, I mean, the reason why there's such a big gap between those is because Titanic was just such a gigantic movie.
It was a phenomenon.
I mean, until, 4 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, it was the second highest grossing film of all time.
And
so, I mean, it's just, I think to me that's just really interesting is that, especially in comparing these two films, this is, the whole idea, part of the whole reason or the idea behind Back to the Box Office is this idea of kind of looking at how the box office has changed, especially from the 90s to today. Like, I feel like there's less of a dramatic shift between the box office of the late 2000s or even mid 2000s to today. I mean, like, yeah, in the mid 2000s or even all of the 2000s, really, most of the films that were number one in the box office for that year were typically existing properties already. So right. I mean, you might have, like when Pirates 1 came out, I don't think it was number one the year it came out, but it's like, okay, that was a new property, but Pirates 2 and Pirates 3, it's like, okay, those are based on existing properties, or the Lord of the Ring trilogy, or Batman's and and Spider-Man's. Like, a lot of the films that came out in the thousands, not necessarily every single one, but a lot of them were based on pre-existing properties. I feel like the biggest difference between the box office today versus the one in the 2000s is that the films today are more primarily like superhero centric. Mm-hmm. That's kind of, I guess, a bigger change, but they're still largely based on existing properties. For the 90s, I mean, it was like the Wild West. And I mean, I know Jurassic Park was based on a book, but the movie is far bigger than the book ever was. Like, I didn't even know there was a book until like a year ago, that the book actually came out before the first movie. But yeah, I mean, I just think that, like, I mean, I guess people could say it's like, well, how much have things changed when Jurassic World 2 was one of the highest grossing films of 2018. Because I think Jurassic World 2 was like the third or fourth
I think it was
film
top
of
3.
2018. I mean, I guess I could pull it up, but Jurassic World 2 obviously did very well for itself. But yeah, so in that comparison, I mean, these are films that it's like, okay, Jurassic Park came out now, and, or Jurassic World comes out now and it still does very well. But I think one thing you can really see the difference is like, like a film like Godzilla, it's like, okay, this is an existing property. But I kind of think in a lot of sense because it's kind of in a weird spot because even though it's very well known, it's not... I don't really think that it's really captured people's imaginations as much as Jurassic Park movies. So like I think when Jurassic World 1 did really well, I think it's because a lot of people look back and they said, oh, I really love Jurassic Park 1, or even though I don't necessarily like Jurassic Park 2, people might look back and say, oh, I really like those two films. And that kind of carried Jurassic World. But with Godzilla, I feel like a lot of moviegoers, at least in the United States today, I don't really know if they actually have like a spectacular Godzilla they look back at. Like people people that are like 30s or younger, even 40s or younger. Like, what's the Godzilla that you think of? Like, a lot of younger people might think of, okay, well, there's the Godzilla with Matthew Broderick.
Right.
But that was pretty panned, and that didn't do very well. So it's like, okay, you're not going to compare it to that Godzilla. So most people that are under the age of 40, I mean, what Godzilla are they going to think about? They're going to think of like one of the Godzillas that came out in the 70s or 80s, where like it has the same production quality as an episode of the Power Rangers that you would watch.
And it's where
they
it's
have
a major
like the big machines fighting the monsters. It's like, I think a lot of Americans, they know of Godzilla, but I don't really think, in my opinion, I mean, obviously there are people out there that are fans of Godzilla himself and the franchise, but I just don't really think that there's like that many people that really love his films. I mean, even the first Godzilla came out, the 2014 one, it opened at nearly $100 million, and which is totally fine. And especially in 2014, I mean, we didn't have films come out yet, like Endgame, which opened at $300 almost $60 million. So $98 million opening in 2014 is fine. I mean, that's fine even by today's standards, but I just kind of think that was more of just a one-off. And I guess the biggest thing that I would just take away in comparison of the two, or comparing the two in the box office, is the idea of this whole, trying to copy the MCU model of the cinematic universe. World building. And I just really, I think this Godzilla, this really kind of just puts the nail in the coffin for that, where it just proves that Marvel was able to do something that really other film franchises were never really able to duplicate up to this point or replicate. And I really don't know if there'll be another attempt anytime soon to replicate it, to really, go all out and do this, Because I remember reading an article, maybe it was like a couple years ago, where it was suggesting that Paramount was thinking about making a Transformers shared cinematic universe.
Right, I've heard that as well.
And it's just like, oh man, these things are going to work. I think one thing too that lends itself for why the MCU worked, and why even the DCEU could have worked, is that, the MCU, I mean, yeah, all these characters can come together and fight a big baddie together, but all these characters, they're individual characters. Like Iron Man has a girlfriend, he has friends, he has his own story. He has this whole world by himself. So, when you have these, combination films, or you have these team-up films, you can then send these characters and okay, here's your own independent story, right? And it worked for that because you built up the independent stories, right? Or you can send them to their independent stories.
And then the audience is invested. They kind of put more into it. They get more out of it.
Exactly. Well, it's just, they have their own things, but, for the MonsterVerse, it's just... for Godzilla, they made a good third of one movie. the parts with Bryan Cranston I thought were really good. And that was pretty low scale, but, it's just the two monsters. But, yeah, and this, and another thing, too, I just think that's just so audacious in this movie. And if you watch it, you'll see it. It's like you're being bashed over the head with it. It's this whole idea of Kong. They mention Skull Island and King Kong so many times in this movie. I feel like you're getting hit over the head with a frying pan with the number of times they mention Skull Island. Skull Island this, Skull Island that. And it's like, oh my gosh, you guys, you produced a really bad movie with the intent of just trying to make another film in the franchise with another monster film. And I think in doing so, you've basically largely just kind of sacrificed even making a film that's even halfway decent. And I feel like, the difference between that and Jurassic Park 2 is, Jurassic Park, even with all of its warts and whatnot, I don't think. Yeah, was it a? I mean, anytime you make a sequel, could you argue that it's a cash grab? Yeah, I mean, you can make that argument for any sequel. I mean, they're making it to make money because they know the first one made money. But at least Jurassic Park 2, I feel like it wasn't so audacious and such a spit in the face. I just feel like it was just a common sequel. It's like,
it also there's memorable moments in Jurassic World or Jurassic Park 2. There's memorable sequences like the raptor sequence in the cornfield.
That's true.
Is, I wouldn't go so far as to say iconic, but it's one of the things people remember most about Jurassic Park 2.
And it's clever.
Or you have the T-Rex.
Not clever, but it's unique.
The T-Rex loose in San Diego. You have, like, you know, iconic images like that. Even something that's, you know, ridiculous is as Jeff Goldblum's daughter gymnast kicking the Velociraptor and impaling it down below off of a bunch of beams, you know, in that weird shed building thing.
Oh yeah, when they're running, yeah.
Like, even that, like, maybe it's not the best and maybe it's super corny, but you remember it. And, you know, from what you've been saying as well, it's just, you know, there's not a lot of memorable things in King of the Monsters. It just doesn't have that same...
I mean, all the films in the Monsterverse are very unmemorable. The only thing I remember after all three of them is, wow, I remember Bryan Cranston and thinking, like, oh, I wish this guy was in it more.
Right.
But before we just go off and just totally slamming the film, let's jump to the third part of the Back to Box Office where we do a little bit of cast swapping. Again, I mean, I kind of wish that this was, the last episode that we did at Back to the Box Office where we compared the two Aladdin films. Like, I like those two, so it's very easy to talk about them in a very glowing and positive way and have a little bit more fun with it. For the cast swapping, I just feel like, I mean, I feel like it probably really wouldn't have made a huge difference. Like, if you had gotten the Coach K guy to flip with Jeff Goldblum, I mean, I feel like the characters would have acted very similarly. Like, because in my opinion, I feel like Jeff Goldblum's character is better in the first Jurassic Park. Like, I feel like he served the role better as kind of being a side character.
Right.
Because he's kind of witty and a little, like, very flirtatious Laura Dern's character. And I thought he did very well as kind of an in-the-background type character. But in the second Jurassic Park, I really felt they kind of made him a little bit more of like a generic dad, which is exactly what happens in Godzilla 2 with the Coach K guy. Because this whole film, he's just pursuing, his daughter is the girl from Stranger Things, right? And he's just, my daughter, everything, my daughter. It's like, well, dude, literally, there's a part in the film where the monsters are going to like major cities and the whole world, and they're destroying cities. I mean, and in the King of the Monsters film, they've literally destroyed all of Washington D.C. There's like water everywhere, and like it literally looks like a scene out of the apocalypse. And it's everything, my daughter, and it's like, oh my gosh, it's like, yeah, I get it. Like, shut up. Like, this film, like, both movies definitely try to do that same thing. So yeah, I think the comparison of switching Jeff Goldblum with the guy from Godzilla, like Coach K guy, you could totally make that swap and nothing would change. Gosh, I'm just trying to. I mean,
is there any other?
Julianne Moore with the girl from Departed. Oh my gosh.
Oh, Vera Farmiga.
Is that's her name? Susan Conjuring?
From The Conjuring? Yeah, Vera.
Every time I think of her, I always think of The Departed, and then I also think like, wow, like how old is she? Because in Departed, she don't look that young.
No, I always think.
But maybe she just has an old lady face.
I always think of Source Code for her.
Oh yeah. But because Departed came out before Source Code.
Yeah, Departed was like.
Because that was 2006.
I think
it was 2006. I think Source Code was like 2011, 2012.
Yeah, Source Code was in the 2010s.
I mean, in my mind, that woman's like 55, but I feel like she's probably really more like 37. I guess again, I'll look it up. I'll look it up real quick and see.
But switching them, do you anything? Would you?
Nothing at all.
What about Vera Farmiga in Jurassic Park 2?
Well, I mean, if she was put in the position of Julianne Moore, I mean, it probably would have been the same. I mean, she's roughly like she's kind of the bad guy in Godzilla. She's a bad guy for like a good portion of it, but kind of like a stupid bad guy. I mean, I just feel like with the cast swapping, I don't know. I just feel like it probably really wouldn't have made like that big of a. I mean, I'm trying to think of what could even be a funny swapping.
Well, the other thing too is with this movie, one of the biggest complaints from the 2014 Godzilla was that there wasn't enough monster fighting. There wasn't enough
in this either. I didn't think.
And this one, I read something earlier today that was someone saying that it was too much fighting. It was too much monsters.
Well, the monsters when they fight in this movie, they're very like darkened. Like it's very kind of dark and like I don't know. I mean, I looked her up. She's 45. I think it said she was 45.
She's gonna be furious if she hears this, and we're calling her 50 something.
She turns 46 in August. Yeah, I just kind of feel like she looks like an old person. I mean, I mean, she's a lovely woman. I just feel like she just looks old. But I mean, I guess 45. I mean, I guess that's middle aged. But I just think, yeah, the biggest takeaway that I guess you could just take out is that Godzilla is probably gonna. I mean, I guess it's really hard to say today in film like what's considered necessarily a flop or not. I mean, you could definitely classify a flop being a movie that makes less money than they spent in making it. But the caveats today being that, like, you know, when you consider marketing costs and all those things, it's not necessarily, you know, it's not that you look at a film and you're like, okay, well, the film had a $200 million budget and they spent, $120 million in marketing, thus meaning that if the movie makes over $320 million, it was worth it. Like,
right.
You know, the film industry doesn't necessarily work like that because international markets, they take a cut of the portion. Sometimes, like, the budget can go over that. Sometimes the marketing can go over that. And you got to think, too, like, for a lot of these films, you know, they're getting financing from banks oftentimes or other lenders. So it's not like it's their own money and they're like, oh, yeah, that's great. You know, we made a film for $200 million and, you know, after all of our marketing, you know, we made a $10 million profit. Like, they're not happy at that. Like, when they invest $200 million into a film, I mean, I've never heard an analyst actually say this, but I imagine that they, most of the time, if they're going to spend that kind of money on a film, and this Godzilla movie is one of those films, like $170 million budget, I'm sure that they wanted to at least make like over $500 million easily. Like, there's way they're gonna. I mean, I'm sure anything under that is probably considered something of a, like, I don't want to say loss because it might not necessarily be a loss, but in their mind, it's a very big disappointment. Like, when they see a movie like this, big budget, and it underperforming so greatly.
Well, especially they've had all the promos. They've advertised it a ton with like the NBA Finals, and you've seen ads on all these major networks and all over the internet. I get pop-ups of ads for it. And when you think about, you know, putting in that time and that effort and that money and trying to build the franchise up like that, it's got to be disappointing and discouraging.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, all right. Well, that back to box office was a little a little bit more negative than previous ones, but definitely make sure you check out our next episode. I haven't decided yet if we're going to do a Secret Life of Pets 2 or we're going to look at the X-Men. We have an unwatchable of the X-Men coming out in the near future too, so if you're hearing this, make sure to check out for that. So we might do Dark Phoenix just because it kind of matches that. But anyways, yeah, Dustin, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you everybody listening to this. And yeah, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you like this video, make sure to check out other videos on our channel. And thank you again.